Hello, class. Welcome to week 6 and lecture 5 of REL 155, Early and Medieval Church History. So thank you for those of you that have turned in your tests. I have not had a chance to grade them yet. I will try to grade them this next week. So if you're curious and want to know your grades, just let me know in the email, and I'll let you know as soon as I've graded it. Hopefully, I'll have those done by next week. Um, and I think the school is also getting to plan for the summer quarter. So I encourage you to register for the summer quarter as soon as you can. As far as I know, I will be teaching the graduate level classes. So I will not be teaching the your level or classes for you in the summer, but I'll be teaching the graduate, and maybe I'll be teaching undergraduate again in the fall. So I don't know the plans just yet, but that's what I expect at the moment. Um, all right, before we begin the lecture, I briefly want to go over again the extra credits field trip option that I've made available. Now, I do give you credit for attending a church and writing about it. I think I've had one student submit a report. So if you want to attend any church and then write about it, I will give you credit for doing so, but I'll also give you credit um, even just for attending a church, a field trip with the class. So hmm, actually, let me go to the other page. Um, and I'm planning this field trip for this class, which is, let's see, attending this worship service at Holy Virgin Mary Russian Orthodox Cathedral. The address is here, 650 Mitchell Torina Street in Los Angeles. It's not too far away from the school's location. It's in kind of the same part of Los Angeles. And I'm planning to attend on Sunday, May 19th at 10 a.m. So if you would like to attend this, and if you meet me there and sign my attendance sheet, I will give you 5 points just for attending, even if you don't write about it. But I'll give you another 5 points if you write about it. And so what what I'm looking for when you write about a church trip is this here, one page format for church worship service reports. So worth up to 10 points, 5 points for attendance alone, and 10 points for doing this. So uh, just two questions. The first, number one, for the first part, describe the worship service, the name of the church, the date and time you attended, what you observed about the church overall, and your experience, such as the style of worship, main points of the sermon or teaching as you understood them, friendliness of the people, how you enjoyed the experience, etc. So this should be about 1/2 page. And if you are in both my classes and you're doing this for both class, it's possible to get extra credit for both classes, and you can repeat question one for both of the classes. But question two is different depending on the class. Analyze the church you attended in terms of course material. So if you're in for this class, REL 155, right, what you can learn about the church's history or application of theology or practices that you learned from the church history class. And then if you're in my REL 135 class, and you're writing for that class, describe the church's interpretation and application of the Bible. So to answer these questions, you can look for a few key points from the service and the teaching, church bulletin, and announcements of church events. However, more can be learned if you're able to talk to the pastor or other church members or leaders, especially before or after the service. And that should be about 1/2 page. So 1 page altogether. But the point is that you try to think about the course material and see it in practice. So for this class, church history, think about what you've learned from church history, or what you can learn from this church's own specific history, as well as what you can observe about the way that they maybe teach uh, Christian teachings you've learned about in the history class, or things like that. All right. Uh, so this is, I've chosen for extra credits, if you would like to join me, the Eastern Orthodox, and that is one of the three main branches of Christianity, and you will see the kind of the development of the or how the first two main branches split in today's lecture, as well as some of the even the offshoots of those. All right, so that is um, again the extra credit field trip option, and please note you're allowed to do this only once, or I'm only going to give you credit for doing it once. So if you have submitted this to me already, I will not accept it again, or I will not give you an additional 10 points. 10 points is the maximum possible for each class. But if you've turned it in one class, I'll also will accept it for the other class if you haven't been taking both of my classes this time. Okay, if you have any questions, feel free to ask in the email. But now we will move on to our actual lecture material for today. And if you would like to, I will also email this church address to you in case you're not able to see it enough during just this time right here. But it is again very close to our campus, just a few miles away, and I chose the a week and a half, so the week after Mother's Day. Okay, so now we move on to chapter 15, which is Peter as Pontifex Maximus. This is about the beginnings of the papacy. Peter, of course, is this is referring to one of the apostles of Jesus, uh, the one whose originally was named Simon, but Jesus renamed Peter and said he is the rock. So there are different understandings about his role in church history and leadership, and we'll see how the Catholic Church came to equate him with the first pope, or the first sort of human head of the church after Jesus, and then the one whose successors they believe should still be the kind of the supreme leader, or the major um, human leader of the church, known as the Pope, or the office known as the papacy. All right, in June 452, Attila the Hun advanced on Rome. A sudden raid over the Alps brought him into northern Italy, where he met with resistance at only a few places. The weakened Roman army kept out of range, and the population fled. At a fordable spot on the Po River, Attila met an embassy from Rome, the usual peace delegation. He was about to send them away when he heard the bishop Leo was there as an emissary for the Roman emperor. Leo was commissioned to negotiate with one of the mighty men of the panic-stricken world in the hope of avoiding chaos. The Roman emperor was doing nothing to preserve the ancient capital of the empire and its surrounding territories from devastation. So the bishop, or the church leader of the city, now acting in the name of the emperor, sat facing Attila alone. The contest seemed unequal, the law of conquest versus the law of faith, a foreign king and a ruling pope. Long before the arrival of the embassy from Rome, Attila had probably made up his mind about further military advances. Epidemics and his army, added to widespread famine, were forcing him to end his campaign. But nobody knew it. So he willingly granted an interview to the imperial envoy, and in the course of it, he granted the Pope's plea that the capital should be spared. He even promised to withdraw from Italy, and he kept his word. The Bishop of Rome had assumed a new role and staked a fresh claim on the future. The papacy is a highly controversial subject. No other institution has been so loved and so hated. Some Christians have considered the Pope as the vicar or minister of Christ. Others have denounced him as the Antichrist, or the opponent of Christ, or substitute for Christ. And traditionally, Christians have believed that there would be one end time Antichrist who would be sort of the embodiment of all evil. And some of the early Protestant reformers believed that was the Pope of their time. So, as you will learn if you take Reformation and modern church history, that I hope to teach sometime in the future, all sides agreed, however, that Leo represents an important stage in the history of this unique institution. He demonstrates the papacy's capacity to adapt to different environments in its long history. The Roman Empire, the Germanic kingdoms of the Middle Ages, the national states of modern times, and today the developing worlds of Asia and Africa. Let's look at the Roman Catholic claim. According to the official teaching of the Roman Catholic Church, defined at the First Vatican Council in 1870, Jesus Christ established the papacy with the Apostle Peter, and the Bishop of Rome, as Peter's successor, bears the supreme authority or primacy over the whole church. Both Eastern Orthodox churches and Protestant denominations deny both of these claims. Our primary concern is neither to prove nor refute the Roman Catholic claims, but a survey of Christian history. Whatever the absolute claims of church authorities, history indicates that the concept of papal rule of the whole church was established by slow and painful stages. Leo was a major figure in that process because he provides for the first time the biblical and theological basis of the papal claim. The term pope itself is not crucial in the emergence of the doctrine of papal primacy. The title Papa originally expressed the fatherly care of any and every bishop of his flock. It only began to be reserved for the Bishop of Rome in the 6th century, long after the claim of primacy. We must also separate the honor of the Church of Rome from the authority of its head. The early centuries of Christian history offer abundant evidence of Rome's prominence among the churches of the western regions of the empire. Honor surrounded the Roman Church since Rome was the imperial capital and eternal city, and the Church of Rome was the largest and wealthiest church with a reputation for orthodoxy and charity. Despite persecution of all kinds, the Roman congregation quickly grew in numbers and significance. By the middle of the 3rd century, its membership probably approached 30,000. Size meant influence. Several early Christian writers, beginning with Irenaeus in the 2nd century, refer to Peter and Paul as founders of the church in Rome, and to subsequent bishops as successors of the apostles. Looking at the New Testament, it does not seem that Peter or Paul actually founded the Church of Rome, but that was the claim that was made by these early church leaders. So these roots in the apostolic age were important in a day when Gnostic teachers appealed to a secret tradition arising from Christ. So you should remember the Gnostics as a heretical group, as you've learned in previous lessons. They claimed there was a secret teaching that was passed on from Christ to sort of the inner circle of his apostles, but the church as a whole said no. The true teaching was passed down to the church, Christ followers. So what they're claiming Christ passed on was actually um, not true. It was their own false teaching that they made up that they're attributing to Christ. Uh, so many Catholic Christians felt that a list of bishops traced back to Peter and Paul was a sure means of protecting the apostolic message or ensuring the church's teaching was correct. This respect for Rome's traditions, however, did not prohibit able men like Irenaeus and Cyprian from disagreeing with Rome when they felt the church or its bishop was in error. Up to the time of Constantine, history offers no conclusive evidence that the Bishop of Rome exercised jurisdiction outside Rome. Rome's growing influence was a part of the increasingly complex church structure emerging in the 3rd and 4th centuries. Church organization developed in two important ways: the authority of church councils and the authority of certain bishops over other bishops. Councils arose when churches in various areas began sending their pastors or bishops to meetings to discuss common problems. These were at first irregular, but during the 3rd century, these provincial councils began to meet annually. The pastors of churches established by the apostles came to possess informal spiritual prestige, and the bishops from the larger cities exercised authority in certain matters over the pastors from smaller towns. As the church grew, it adopted the structure of the empire. The provincial town of the empire became the episcopal town of the church. Bishops in larger cities soon supervised the bishops in the provinces of that area. The empire was divided into several major regions. So, within the church, people came to think of the church at Rome exercising authority in Italy, as well as other prominent churches over their respective areas. As the churches within the province thrust out into the countryside, usually through a preaching tour of the bishop, their churches were established to meet the needs of the converts. Ministers who served them were not bishops, but were called priests. That's an abbreviation from the word presbyter, so didn't quite have the same understanding as priests in the Old Testament, but unfortunately the same word came to be used. So presbyter is the Greek word for elder. Priests essentially meant elders. These priests in the country parishes were consecrated and controlled by the city bishop. As the 4th century began, the Catholic churches were establishing general policies by regular regional councils of bishops and handling day-to-day affairs under the oversight of bishops in each area. General councils of the church arose only after Constantine's conversion. To settle major issues troubling the churches, the emperor convened synods of bishops from a wide area. The Bishop of Rome came to major importance with these developments. The Council of Nicaea recognized the bishops of Alexandria, Antioch, and Rome as preeminent in their own areas. Let's look at the imperial move east. In 330, an important new factor appeared. Constantine moved his imperial residence to the New Rome, to the ancient city Byzantium on the Bosporus. The city, which he renamed Constantinople, shifted the political center to the east, and as Constantinople's power increased, the political importance of Old Rome declined. Soon the churches looked to the bishop of Constantinople for spiritual leadership equal to that of the other major cities. Shortly after Emperor Theodosius entered Constantinople, he published laws making Christianity the state church. Pagan temples were closed and sacrifices were forbidden. In May 381, the new emperor called a general council at Constantinople, at which Theodosius made an appearance, wanting to bring order into his Christian church. However, he invited only bishops from the eastern part of the temple, or eastern part of the empire, the Italians, notably Damasus, Bishop of Rome, were absent. The basic action of the council was to confirm and renew the Nicene Creed, but the council also asserted that the Bishop of Constantinople shall take precedence immediately after the Bishop of Rome. The West at once realized the significance of the Bishop of Constantinople's promotion as a political move to strengthen the episcopal power in the East. The masses objected to the council's action, insisting that Rome's preeminence did not rest upon its status or on the decrees of a council. At a synod in Rome the next year, bishops from the West argued that the Roman Church takes precedence over the other churches because it was given the primacy by Jesus, who built his church upon Peter. So if you remember from the Gospels, when Jesus renamed Peter, he says, the name Peter means rock, and Jesus says, on this rock I will build my church. In other words, I will build my church on Peter. So there's different understandings about that. Peter was the leader of the early Christian community initially, not to the point that he was unquestionable per se, but this is how the Catholics developed that idea that the successors would be the number one leader of the church, almost to the point, or eventually to the point of being unquestionable, as we'll see in later lessons. By the end of the 4th century, it was clear that the church at Constantinople and the church at Rome were going in different directions. Strains were forming that would later lead to a split between the Christianity of the East and the West. Constantinople relied more on its political position and was drawn into the sphere of Eastern imperial policies, and the patriarch or the bishop grew less independent. In contrast, the weakness of the Roman Empire in the West led to a growing independence of the Bishop of Rome, the patriarch of the West, as the Pope had no strong rival. The bishops of Rome relied more heavily upon the argument from scripture and tradition that Peter was given primacy by Jesus, which led to the primacy of the Bishop of Rome as Peter's successor. Bishop Damasus, who was bishop from 366 to 384, marked the transition to the new day for Old Rome. He joined the old Roman civic and imperial pride with Christianity. He argued that Rome had a right to claim Peter and Paul as citizens because they were martyred or killed in Rome. Let's look at Leo's case for primacy. Before his election to the papal office, Leo, who was a nobleman from a region north of Rome, he had been sent by the emperor to Gaul to arbitrate during a dispute. When the Bishop of Rome died, the Roman clergy sent a delegate to inform Leo that the choice of a new bishop had fallen to him. In a sermon he preached on the day of his entrance into office, he praised the glory of the blessed Apostle Peter, whose power and authority continue in his chair. Rome now gained a powerful new leader as Leo became the supreme head of all Christendom, which means Christian civilization. The new pope laid the theoretical foundation for papal primacy on the promise of Christ to build his church on Peter, and the argument that the bishops of Rome are his successors in that authority. This was the complete reversal of the policy of Constantine, who used Christianity as a tool. He had put political and religious pressure on the bishops at the Council of Nicaea to preserve the unity of the church, which he considered essential for the stability of the empire. A century later, Leo raised the status of the bishop's office in Rome once and for all, as the dynasty of Peter. Leo's use of texts from the Gospels to support Peter's primacy was in spite of several difficulties. However, first, the Gospels make clear that preeminence among the followers of Christ was not to be according to the pattern of the princes of the world who exercise lordship and authority, but Christ's disciples must lead by humble service. Second, Peter continued to be notoriously unstable, being rebuked by Jesus and even called Satan for not understanding God's ways. If you know the story, almost immediately after uh, Jesus gave Peter the honor of naming him Peter and saying that on this rock I'll build my church. Then Jesus began to teach about his death, and Peter tried to rebuke him and say, "No, Lord, this will not happen to you." And so Jesus recognized that uh, what Peter was saying was essentially from the enemy Satan, who was trying to oppose God's plans. So Jesus said, "Get behind me, Satan." So Peter was a spokesman. He was very bold. He always was the one that answered the questions, or probably said what the other disciples were thinking. And so he did have that key role of leadership, but a lot of times the things he said were not right. And we would call that in English, we have the idiom, he stuck his foot in his mouth, or he said kind of foolish things, or foolish and impulsive things, or behaved in impulsive ways on numerous occasions. But he did still have enough leadership core that Jesus used him to lead his church in the early days. All right. So later, he even denied his Lord in a moment of crisis, and was criticized by Paul for his inconsistency in welcoming Gentiles. Third, the theory assumes that the grant of authority was not to Peter personally, but to his office as Bishop of Rome. But this identification of authority with a particular office is nowhere evident in the Bible. Leo's argument, however, seemed to be sent from God to an uncertain period in the Church of Rome. The barbarian attacks made the imperial court at Ravenna desperate for the support of any authority that might help to hold the empire in the West together. In 445, the Emperor Valentinian III even issued a decree calling for compulsory attendance of bishops at the papal court. Leo's vision of the papacy seemed to have the support not only of the emperor, but of the sacred fathers meeting at Chalcedon. In October 451, this suburb of Constantinople on the shore of the Bosporus drew 350 bishops to defend the true faith against false interpretations of the life of Jesus Christ. We've covered that in a previous lesson. Even though the emperor had called the council to Chalcedon and visited it personally, Pope Leo proved a dominant personality, as his letters, decisions, and actions were quoted frequently. In the historic session on October 30th, 451, however, the same council gave the Bishop of Constantinople as Bishop of New Rome authority equal to Leo's. Constantinople became for the East what Rome was for the West. The sole and independent leadership of the Eastern Church by the Patriarch of Constantinople was confirmed. Leo's representative to the council immediately protested, but the council fathers would not alter their decision. It was an obvious reversal for Leo, as Christianity acquired not one, but two heads, the Roman Church of the Western Empire and the Greek Church of the Eastern Empire. Let's turn to standing amidst the ruins. The Western Empire had declined significantly, becoming essentially a shadow of its former self. 3 years after Leo's successful negotiations with Attila, he faced another test of his diplomacy when a fresh enemy threatened Rome. This time it was the Vandals, a migrating tribe from Scandinavia, driven southwestward by the Goths, advancing from Hungary through Gaul and Spain. They had settled in North Africa and waited for years for the right moment to strike at Rome. At the end of March 455, Gaiseric, king of the Vandals, set sail with 100 ships manned by Carthaginian sailors. His army landed north of the Tiber, creating panic in Rome. While attempting to escape, the Emperor Maximus was slain by one of his own bodyguards, and the troops were disorganized. On June the 2nd, 455, the Vandals entered Rome, meeting no resistance. At the city gate, Gaiseric was met by Leo, who was leading priests. When they faced each other, Leo begged for mercy. He urged the king to restrain his troops and implored him not to burn the city. Gaiseric nodded, agreeing instead to 14 days of looting. The Vandals then plundered the city, sacking palaces and temples and taking gold and silver. They also took political prisoners like the empress and her daughters, then senators and members of the Roman aristocracy to be held for ransom. After 14 days, the Vandals loaded their ships and withdrew to Carthage. Once they were gone, the Romans held a solemn service of thanksgiving. Rome had not been burned down, massacre had been avoided, and only a few Christian churches had been plundered. All the Romans knew what their bishop had done for them, but only a few of the faithful were present for the service, as they were still terrified from the looting and wondered if Rome would ever recover. Leo reminded his audience that these were days of their chastisement and liberation in which God had saved them. Leo made no reference to himself, though he had achieved the sparing of Rome for a second time. But everyone understood that Leo, not the emperor, had taken responsibility for the eternal city of Rome. Now we'll turn to chapter 16, Somewhere Between Heaven and Earth, which is about Eastern Orthodoxy. One summer afternoon in the year 1054, as a worship service was about to begin in the Church of Holy Wisdom, or Hagia Sophia, at Constantinople, Cardinal Humbert and two other representatives of Pope Leo IX entered the building and made their way up to the sanctuary. They placed an official papal document known as a bull of excommunication upon the altar and marched out. A deacon ran after him in great distress and begged him to take back the bull. Humbert refused. For centuries, Christians have considered this incident the Great Schism, or the Great Division between Eastern Orthodox and Western Catholicism, comparable to Martin Luther's tacking the 95 Theses on the church door in Wittenberg, Germany, leading to the schism between Protestantism and Roman Catholicism in the 16th century. The confrontation in Constantinople came only after a long and complicated process. Of the three major divisions in Christianity today, Roman Catholicism, Eastern Orthodoxy, and Protestantism, the least known in the West is Eastern Orthodoxy, and most Christians in Europe and North America may think of Eastern Orthodoxy as a kind of Roman Catholicism without the Pope. Such an uninformed response is understandable, since Christians in the West generally start by asking the same questions about how people are saved, what the church is, and where religious authority lies. Protestant and Catholic Christians simply disagree about the answers to these questions. In Orthodoxy, however, the questions themselves are not the same. Orthodoxy reflects a distinctive history and a unique culture. Let's turn to the clue to Orthodoxy. What is Eastern Orthodoxy? Today, it is about 15 distinct churches, mostly in Eastern Europe, bound together by a common faith and a common history. The best starting point for understanding Orthodoxy is probably its holy images called icons. The Orthodox believer who enters a church to attend services goes first to the iconostasis, the wall of paintings that separates the sanctuary from the main hall, and kisses the icons before taking his or her place in the congregation. An Orthodox believer considers these images of Jesus and the saints not the works of a human artist, but as manifestations of a heavenly ideal. They are a kind of window between the earthly and heavenly worlds. In Orthodoxy, the idea of image is the key to understanding the ways of God with humanity. Since men and women are created in the image of God, each human carries the icon of God within them. There is a sharp difference between Eastern Orthodoxy and Western Christianity, or which includes Roman Catholicism and Protestantism. Western Christians are inclined to understand their relationship to God in legal terms. The primary problem they address is guilt from sin. Again, it's a legal concept, and how a person's guilt can be addressed to gain salvation. Later, Protestants and Catholics divided over the answers to this question, but not the question itself. The same sense of legal order is reflected in Roman Catholicism's view of the papacy. According to Rome, Jesus Christ established on Peter a jurisdictional supremacy for the whole church, a theory which at one point made the Pope the supreme ruler of the world. Orthodoxy represents an interesting contrast to Roman Catholicism. The great theme of Orthodox theology is not legal standing before God, but the incarnation or embodiment of God and the recreation of human beings to reflect more of God's image. Sin is not seen as a violation of the legal relationship between God and humanity, but as decreasing the image of God. Salvation, therefore, consists of the restoration or perfection of the full image of God within people. Christ, the incarnate God, came to earth to restore the icon of God in humanity. The major themes of Orthodoxy then are rebirth, recreation, and the transfiguration of men and women. The church is seen as the mystical body of Christ, constantly renewed by the Holy Spirit, in which men and women are restored to the likeness of God. Orthodox believers call the process theosis, or deification. While the language of becoming gods troubles Western believers, Orthodox believers do not claim that believers become God in the sense of Father, Son, or Spirit, but use the language to picture the transformation of believers to become fit companions for eternal communion with God and in God. Athanasius pictured Jesus fully sharing in the corrupted world of humans so that we can fully share in the incorruptible fellowship of God. All right, let's take a break here. We'll continue in just a moment.